Cowboy rescues Apache mother and child in deadly storm. What happened will shock you. The sun had barely risen, casting a golden glow over the horizon, and the dew on the grass sparkled like tiny diamonds. Out here in the wide open land, everything seemed calm, peaceful, almost untouched by time. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and pine. It was a perfect morning for anyone who loved the solitude of the frontier. On the edge of this wide plain lived a cowboy, a man who had spent most of his life under the open sky. He was known in the nearby settlements for his courage, his skill with a horse, and his quiet sense of justice. His face was tanned and weathered from years of riding under the sun, his hands strong and calloused from hard work. He lived alone in a small cabin at the foot of a hill with only his loyal horse for company. Despite his tough appearance, there was a kindness in his eyes that drew people to trust him. He had a gentle heart, especially for those who could not defend themselves. That morning, the cowboy was preparing for his usual ride. He saddled his horse carefully, checking the ropes and leather to ensure nothing would break during the ride. He was planning a simple journey to check his traps and see to his small herd of cattle. The sky, however, was not as calm as it appeared. In the distance, faint clouds were gathering, moving slowly at first, almost unnoticed. But someone like him, who had spent so many years reading the land and weather, could sense that the clouds were unusual. The air had a strange stillness, and the wind carried an odd chill that hinted at something more than the morning cold. Far across the plain, a small figure struggled along a narrow dirt path. It was a mother, an Apache woman, and she was not alone. Clinging to her side was a small child, no more than 4 years old, whose tiny legs struggled to keep pace with his mother's hurried steps. Their faces were streaked with dirt, their clothes wet from the morning dew. They had been traveling for hours, maybe days, trying to reach a safe place before the weather turned against them. The mother's eyes were tired but determined. She held the child close, shielding him from the cold wind as best she could. Every now and then, she whispered words of encouragement, soft words in her native language, trying to comfort him even as her own heart raced with worry. The cowboy noticed them from a distance while he was riding his horse along the ridge. At first, he thought they were travelers like many who crossed these lands, but something about their struggle caught his attention. The mother seemed desperate, her movements frantic, and the small child looked terrified. The wind had picked up now, tugging at the woman's hair and clothes, making it difficult for her to keep moving forward. The cowboy's instincts told him that they were in danger, that the land and weather would not wait for them. He slowed his horse and watched carefully, scanning the sky and the terrain. He could see the dark clouds rolling in faster now, covering the bright morning sun and casting shadows over the plains. The wind began to howl through the grass, carrying a strange, electric scent. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the first distant rumble of thunder echoed across the hills. This was not a small storm, it was the beginning of something fierce and dangerous. The cowboy's mind raced. He knew these lands well, the rivers that could suddenly rise, the mud that could trap even the strongest horse, the trees that could fall with the wind. He also knew that a mother and child caught alone in such a storm would have almost no chance of finding safety. The thought tightened his chest. He had faced storms himself, had fought the wind and rain on horseback countless times, but this was different. This was not about survival for himself. It was about protecting 2 lives that depended entirely on his courage and quick action. He adjusted the reins and turned his horse toward the struggling pair. Every step brought him closer, and with each passing moment, the clouds grew darker and the wind grew stronger. The grass bent under the pressure of the gusts, and small stones rolled along the dirt path. The cowboy could see the mother's hair whipping across her face, her small child clutching her hand tightly, fear etched on both their faces. It was clear they were exhausted. The mother stumbled over the uneven ground, and the child nearly fell several times, crying out in fright. As he approached, the cowboy called out to them, his voice strong but calm. "Hey there, are you all right?" His words carried over the wind, though faintly. The mother looked up, relief washing over her face when she saw someone coming to help. But there was no time for greetings or introductions. The storm was approaching faster than anyone could run from it, and they had only moments to reach safety. He urged his horse forward, carefully navigating the rough terrain, moving as quickly as he could without spooking the frightened animal or causing the mother and child to stumble. He needed to reach them before the rain and wind made the journey impossible. His eyes never left the pair as he closed the distance, measuring each step and anticipating the dangers that lay ahead. He could see small puddles forming in the dirt path, the ground turning slippery and treacherous. Fallen branches littered the way, ready to trip the unwary. The mother noticed him now, and for the first time she felt a flicker of hope. She called out to him in a mixture of English and her native tongue, trying to convey their situation. The cowboy nodded, understanding instantly that words were not as important as action. He had done this many times before, helping those in danger, guiding the lost, protecting the weak. It was in his nature, something deeper than fear, deeper than reason. The wind was now strong enough to bend young trees, and the clouds overhead released the first drops of rain. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone, and the faint rumble of thunder came closer, shaking the plain. The cowboy reached the mother and child just as the rain began to pour. He slid from his horse and offered his hand to the mother, helping her and the child mount carefully. The child clung to his mother, shivering and frightened, while the mother wrapped her arms around him, grateful for the sudden help. The cowboy guided the horse forward, keeping his body between the wind and the mother and child, shielding them as best he could. Every step was careful, every movement deliberate. He knew that one misstep could lead to disaster, not just for him, but for the two lives now in his care. The storm continued to build behind them, and the wide plains that seemed so calm in the morning had become a dangerous landscape. Despite the danger, the cowboy felt a quiet determination. He would not allow this storm to claim lives if he could help it. He urged his horse onward, moving steadily with his eyes fixed on the safest route he could find. The mother whispered words of gratitude through the wind, her voice trembling, but the cowboy only nodded. Words were unnecessary, actions spoke louder. And so, under the darkening sky, with the storm gathering strength, the cowboy, the mother, and the small child began a journey that would test their courage, their endurance, and the strength of the human spirit. Each step they took was a step against nature's fury, and each moment was a reminder of the fragile line between survival and disaster. The calm morning had ended, and a storm unlike any they had faced was coming for them. But together they moved forward, driven by hope, bravery, and the bond that would form in the days to come. The storm arrived faster than anyone could have expected. Dark clouds now stretched across the entire sky, blotting out the sun and turning the plains into a shadowy gray world. The wind howled like a wild animal, tearing through the grass and bending young trees until they almost touched the ground. Drops of rain began to fall, at first gentle, then in quick, sharp bursts that stung the skin and soaked clothes in seconds. The air smelled of wet earth, lightning, and the distant threat of danger. The mother clutched her child tightly, her small arms wrapped around him as she tried to shield him from the cold and the wind. His tiny hands clung to her neck, his face pressed against her shoulder as tears mingled with the rain. He cried out in fear, shivering uncontrollably, and the mother whispered comforting words, though her own voice shook. They were far from any shelter, alone in the open plains, and the storm showed no mercy. Every moment the wind threatened to knock them over, and the ground had already started turning into slippery mud. From a short distance away, the cowboy had been watching them. His horse moved carefully over the wet grass, hooves sliding slightly on the slick surface. He could see the desperation in their movements and the fear in the child's eyes. The storm was growing stronger with every second, and the small family was completely exposed. The cowboy's heart tightened. He knew that if he didn't act immediately, they could be in real danger. He urged his horse forward, calling out to them over the roar of the wind. "Hold on, I'm coming to help you." The mother saw him and her eyes widened with a mixture of relief and worry. She wanted to run to him, but the wind pushed against her with full force, and the mud made her steps uncertain. The child clung to her tighter, his cries louder, frightened by the thunder that now boomed across the plains. The cowboy reached them just as a particularly strong gust knocked the mother off balance. He grabbed her arm, steadying her, while simultaneously stretching out his other hand to help the child. Carefully, he lifted the boy, holding him close, and guided the mother toward the horse. The rain fell in sheets now, cold and relentless, soaking through clothes and chilling the skin. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the twisted landscape for a brief moment. The thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the ground and echoing through the plains. The cowboy felt the power of the storm pressing down on him, and yet he remained focused. Every movement had to be precise. The horse was nervous, stamping its hooves and shaking its head, sensing the danger in the air. But the cowboy whispered to it calmly, stroking its mane and speaking soft words, guiding it steadily forward. The mother mounted the horse first, keeping the child close. He buried his face in her shoulder, trembling with cold and fear. The cowboy helped her adjust her grip, making sure she and the child were secure. Then he mounted behind them, holding onto the saddle tightly and positioning himself to shield them as much as possible from the wind and rain. The storm's force pushed against them, and each step of the horse was a struggle, slipping slightly in the mud. But the cowboy guided it carefully, choosing the safest path he could see through the sheets of rain. The plains had become almost unrecognizable. Small streams of water now ran across the ground, turning into temporary rivers that threatened to wash away anything in their path. Fallen branches and debris littered the terrain, and patches of mud were deep enough to trap a horse if it stumbled. The cowboy had faced storms before, but this one was particularly fierce. He had to think constantly, reading the ground, the wind, and the movement of the clouds above. One wrong step could mean disaster for all three of them. The mother whispered thanks, but her words were nearly lost in the roar of the wind. The child clung to her tightly, shivering and murmuring questions between sobs. The cowboy understood that words would not calm them. Only action, speed, and careful guidance could keep them safe. He leaned forward, speaking softly to both of them over the wind. "We'll be safe soon. Just hold on. Don't let go." His calm voice was like an anchor in the chaos, giving them a tiny sense of hope amid the fear. As they moved forward, the rain grew heavier, soaking through every layer of clothing. Lightning lit up the sky again, closer this time, and the thunder followed almost instantly, shaking the ground and rattling the horse's ears. The child's eyes widened in terror, and he cried out. The mother's arms tightened around him, whispering soothing words, though her own heart pounded with fear. The cowboy kept a steady grip on the reins and on the family behind him, his focus entirely on keeping them moving toward safety. The wind pushed against them from all sides, trying to knock the horse off balance. The cowboy leaned into it, using his strength to guide the animal while shielding the mother and child as best he could. Small branches whipped past, striking the horse and occasionally grazing the mother's arm. The mud pulled at the horse's hooves, threatening to make it stumble. Yet, despite the storm's fury, the cowboy never faltered. He adjusted every movement, anticipating danger, guiding the horse with years of experience through the treacherous terrain. At one point, a larger branch fell directly in their path. The cowboy reacted instantly, pulling the horse to the side and using his own body to shield the mother and child from harm. The branch crashed onto the ground with a loud crack, and the child cried out in fear. The mother whispered reassurances, while the cowboy gave a quick nod, silently telling her they were all still safe. The storm showed no mercy, but he refused to let it overcome them. Every second was a test of skill, courage, and determination. As they continued, the cowboy noticed the rain beginning to collect in larger puddles, small streams forming that could quickly become dangerous. The horse had to step carefully, lifting its hooves high to avoid slipping. The child shivered violently, and the mother's arms ached from holding him tightly. Yet they pressed on, moving step by step, guided by the cowboy's steady hand. Every flash of lightning, every roll of thunder, reminded them of how close danger could be, but also how close they were to finding safety if they trusted the cowboy's skill. The storm raged on around them, relentless and fierce, yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to make progress. The dark clouds above showed small breaks here and there, glimpses of lighter sky that suggested the worst might pass eventually. The wind was still strong, but the rain had lessened slightly, and the horse's steps were becoming more confident as it followed the path chosen by the cowboy. Small signs of the plains re-emerging gave them hope. An unbroken patch of grass, a hill rising ahead, the distant outline of trees that could provide shelter. The mother whispered softly to her child, trying to calm him as he pressed his face into her shoulder. The cowboy's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the safest route. He felt the storm's power, but also the strength of his own determination. He would not allow this family to suffer or be harmed if he could help it. His mind remained focused on the path ahead, guiding the horse carefully, shielding them as best he could, and moving steadily toward safety. Every step was a battle against the elements, but slowly, steadily, they advanced. The mother and child clung to each other, and the cowboy clung to the reins and to them, a protective shield against the chaos of the storm. It was a long, difficult journey, but hope began to grow in their hearts. Despite the fear, the cold, and the relentless rain, they realized that they were not alone. Someone brave, skilled, and determined was leading them through the danger. By the time the rain began to soften slightly, and the wind lost some of its fury, the mother and child were exhausted but alive. Their faces were wet, their clothes soaked, and their bodies tired from the struggle, yet they were together and moving forward. The cowboys' calm, steady guidance had brought them through the first part of the storm, but the journey was far from over. The worst might have passed, or it might still be ahead, but they had survived the first onslaught. And in that moment, even amidst fear and exhaustion, there was hope. The storm showed no signs of slowing down, even as the cowboy guided the mother and child through the treacherous plains. Rain still fell in heavy sheets, soaking everything it touched, and the wind lashed against them with unrelenting force. The horses' hooves slipped in the muddy ground, making every step a careful balance between survival and disaster. The child clung to his mother, shivering and frightened, while she whispered words of comfort he could barely hear over the roar of the storm. The cowboy leaned forward, steadying the horse and keeping an eye on every obstacle in their path. Every movement required precision, and every second mattered. As they moved, the terrain became increasingly difficult. Small hills turned into steep slopes, rivers swelled from the rainfall, and fallen branches littered the ground, hidden beneath puddles that made them nearly invisible. The cowboy's eyes scanned constantly, looking for the safest path while guiding the horse carefully. He knew that one wrong step could send the horse sliding, putting all three of them in danger. Yet despite the obstacles, he remained calm, a pillar of strength in the middle of chaos. The mother's arms ached from holding the child so tightly, and the child whimpered softly, exhausted from fear and cold. The cowboy noticed every small detail, the way the child shivered, the mother's tired eyes, the horse's tense movements. He adjusted his grip on the reins, leaning slightly to shield them from the wind, and whispered reassuring words. "We're almost there. Just a little further. Hold on, don't let go." His voice cut through the storm, calm and steady, like a lighthouse in the middle of a raging sea. Lightning flashed in the sky, illuminating the treacherous landscape for a brief moment. A tree in the distance groaned under the wind, and then one of its branches broke, falling perilously close to the trio. The cowboy reacted immediately, pulling the horse to the side and lowering his body to shield the mother and child. The branch crashed to the ground with a loud crack, but no one was harmed. The child cried out, but the mother held him close, murmuring soothing words, while the cowboy gave a quick nod, silently telling her they were still safe. The journey was exhausting, but they could not stop. The storm continued to rage around them, and the plains offered no shelter. Every step was a test of endurance, courage, and trust. The mother and child leaned against each other, drawing strength from their closeness, while the cowboy led the way, his every action deliberate and careful. He guided the horse over slippery rocks, around puddles that could swallow their hooves, and through patches of dense grass that hid hidden dangers. At one point, they reached a swollen stream that had formed from the relentless rain. The water rushed over rocks, strong enough to knock a person off balance. The horse hesitated, sensing the danger, and the cowboy encouraged it with gentle words and light touches. "Careful, steady, we can do this," he whispered. Step by step, the horse moved forward, navigating the water with precision. The mother clutched her child tightly, their combined weight adding to the challenge, but they made it across safely. The storm was still fierce, and fatigue began to weigh heavily on all three. The child was too small to understand fully, but his fear was evident in every movement. The mother's arms and shoulders ached from holding him, but she refused to let go, drawing courage from the cowboy's presence. The cowboy, too, was tired, but he pushed through, focusing entirely on guiding them through the dangerous terrain. He had faced many storms in his life, but he knew this one required more than strength. It demanded constant vigilance, quick thinking, and the willingness to risk everything to protect those in his care. As they continued, the landscape became more dangerous. Mudslides had formed on the hillsides, and the ground beneath their feet shifted with every step. The horse stumbled slightly, and the cowboy tightened his grip on the reins, guiding it carefully. He used his body to shield the mother and child from the worst of the wind and rain, leaning low and steadying them as best he could. Every obstacle was met with patience and skill, and every challenge reinforced the bond forming between the cowboy and the small family he was protecting. The mother spoke softly, her voice almost lost in the storm, thanking the cowboy for his help. He gave a small nod but said little, focusing on the path ahead. Words were unnecessary, action spoke louder. The child clung to his mother, occasionally looking up at the cowboy with wide, fearful eyes. He did not understand everything that was happening, but he felt safety in the cowboy's calm presence. The cowboy met the child's gaze briefly, giving a reassuring nod and a small smile, showing that they were not alone, even in the middle of such danger. They reached another obstacle, a fallen tree blocking their path. The storm had torn it from the ground, and it lay heavy across the mud, its branches twisted and sharp. The cowboy guided the horse around it, carefully choosing a path that avoided the most dangerous branches. The mother shifted slightly, keeping the child close, while the horse stepped carefully over uneven ground. The storm's rain continued to pour, soaking them to the skin, but the cowboy's determination never wavered. Every step brought them closer to safety, and he refused to allow the storm to defeat them. Lightning struck again nearby, illuminating the plains in a bright flash. Thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the ground and rattling the horse's ears. The child cried out in fear, pressing his face into his mother's shoulder. She whispered softly, soothing him, while the cowboy leaned forward, shielding them both from the worst of the wind and rain. The storm was relentless, but their progress was steady. The plains, dangerous and unforgiving, were no match for their determination to survive. They passed through a narrow path between two hills, the wind funneling through and making the journey even more challenging. The rain pounded down, making visibility difficult, but the cowboy led with skill and caution. He adjusted the horse's steps, leaned low to protect the mother and child, and guided them through the muddy terrain. Each moment was a test, but they pressed on, relying on trust, skill, and the unspoken bond forming between them. By now, exhaustion had set in. The child's small body shivered violently, and the mother's arms trembled from fatigue. The cowboy, too, was tired, but he did not let it show. His focus remained unbroken, his movements precise, and his determination unwavering. They had already overcome so much, and he knew the most dangerous parts might still lie ahead. But he refused to give up, refusing to let the storm claim innocent lives when he could help. Finally, after what felt like hours, they began to see signs of hope. A small rise in the land offered slightly less wind, and the rain had softened to a lighter drizzle. The plains, though still wet and treacherous, seemed more navigable. The mother whispered softly, thanking the cowboy again, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. The child looked up, tears still on his cheeks but eyes wide with wonder, realizing that they were not alone in the face of the storm. The cowboy nodded quietly, giving them a reassuring glance. They were not safe yet, but they had made it through the worst of the storm together. Step by step, they had overcome mud, fallen trees, and raging water. They had faced fear, exhaustion, and the raw power of nature. And through it all, they had relied on courage, trust, and determination. The bond between them had grown, unspoken but strong, a connection formed in the middle of chaos and danger. As the rain finally began to ease and the wind lost some of its fury, the cowboy allowed a small sigh of relief. The mother adjusted her grip on the child, who was now quiet, finally beginning to calm down. The horse, though tired and wet, moved steadily, sensing the lessening danger. The plains were still wild and unpredictable, but for the first time in hours, a small hope had returned. They had survived the storm's first major onslaught, thanks to skill, courage, and the determination to protect life at any cost. The storm had lessened slightly, but the plains were far from safe. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle, but the wind still blew fiercely, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant lightning. Mud covered the ground in thick, slippery layers, and small streams of water ran across the paths they had taken. Fallen trees and broken branches were scattered everywhere, remnants of the storm's fury. The cowboy guided the mother and child carefully, keeping a constant watch on the terrain and adjusting the horse's steps to avoid danger. The mother held her child tightly, still shivering from the storm, but grateful that they had survived the worst of it. The child's small hands clung to her neck, seeking comfort and warmth. She whispered softly to him, words of reassurance that he barely understood, but which calmed him enough to stop crying. The cowboy stayed close behind, leaning forward slightly to shield them from the wind and drizzle. His eyes scanned the path ahead, searching for any hidden danger that might be waiting to challenge them further. As they continued, the terrain became more difficult. The plains opened up into a wide, uneven stretch where water had pooled in many places, creating deep puddles and small, fast-moving streams. The horse carefully picked its way through the mud, slipping slightly on the wet ground. The cowboy leaned low, supporting the mother and child as best he could and guiding the horse with steady hands. Every step was calculated and every movement had to be precise. One wrong step, and they could easily be hurt or trapped. Despite the danger, small moments of connection and human kindness shone through. The cowboy spoke softly to the child over the sound of the wind, offering gentle words to calm him. "It's okay, little one, you're safe now. Just hold on tight and we'll get through this together." The child peeked up briefly, seeing the kind expression on the cowboy's face, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself a small sense of trust. The mother, noticing the connection forming, gave a small nod of gratitude, her heart lifting slightly amid the fear and exhaustion. They came across a small hill, steep and slick with rain. The horse hesitated at the base, sensing the challenge ahead. The cowboy encouraged it with calm words, pressing his legs gently to guide it upward. Step by step, the horse climbed, carefully navigating the muddy slope. The mother leaned forward, holding her child securely, while the cowboy adjusted his position to shield them both from the wind and drizzle. It was slow going, but every careful step brought them closer to safety. A fallen tree blocked their path near the top of the hill. The storm had torn it from the ground, and its branches stretched out like fingers reaching across the mud. The cowboy guided the horse around the obstacle, choosing the safest path. The mother shifted slightly, keeping the child close, while the horse stepped carefully over uneven ground. The child clung to his mother's neck, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The cowboy whispered encouragement, reinforcing the small sense of hope that had begun to grow in their hearts. As they continued down the other side of the hill, the storm showed its lingering power. Patches of mud made the horse's steps slippery, and small streams of water ran down the slope, making navigation difficult. The child's small body shivered with the cold, and the mother's arms ached from holding him so tightly. Yet through every challenge, they moved forward, guided by the cowboy's skill, courage, and unwavering determination. The plains gradually began to show signs of shelter. In the distance, the outline of a small grove of trees became visible, offering a potential place to rest and find protection. The cowboy adjusted their path slightly, guiding the horse toward the trees while keeping a close watch on the surrounding area. The mother whispered to the child, pointing toward the grove and telling him that safety was close. The child's fear began to ease, replaced by a sense of hope, and he pressed closer to his mother. Along the way, small obstacles continued to challenge them. Fallen branches, deep puddles, and uneven terrain slowed their progress, but the cowboy guided the horse carefully, ensuring that every step was secure. He leaned forward when necessary, shielding the mother and child from the wind and rain, and adjusting their positions to keep them balanced. The storm had tested their endurance, but their determination, combined with the cowboy's skill, kept them moving forward. The mother spoke softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her words almost lost in the sound of the wind. The cowboy nodded quietly, focusing on the path ahead. Words were secondary now, their actions and survival were the priority. The child looked up briefly, his eyes meeting the cowboy's. He felt a strange sense of safety in the man's calm presence, and for a brief moment, his fear was replaced with trust. They reached the grove of trees, and the wind began to lessen slightly. The trees provided a small shield from the remaining rain, their branches bending but not breaking under the storm's force. The horse stepped carefully among the roots and uneven ground, guided by the cowboy's steady hands. The mother adjusted her hold on the child, feeling the first small relief since the storm had begun. The child's shivering slowed, and he whispered a quiet word of thanks, still too tired to speak fully. Even as they found a moment of relative safety, the cowboy knew the journey was not over. The plains were still dangerous, and they had to keep moving to reach true shelter. He urged the horse onward, carefully navigating the muddy ground and avoiding any remaining obstacles. The mother followed his lead, her focus entirely on keeping the child safe, while the child clung to her, tired but comforted by the cowboy's presence. Small moments of humanity shone through during this journey. The cowboy offered water from a small flask, shared quietly and carefully with the mother and child. He spoke gentle words to keep their spirits up, while the mother whispered comforting words to her child. In the middle of fear and exhaustion, these moments reminded them all of the strength of trust, kindness, and human connection. The storm had tested their courage, but it had also brought them closer together, forming a bond that could not easily be broken. As the day progressed, the storm continued to lose its strength, though the air remained wet and the wind strong. The plains were still challenging, with mud, water, and fallen branches making every step difficult. But their progress was steady, guided by the cowboy's experience and determination. He led the horse through the safest paths, shielding the mother and child whenever necessary, and ensuring that every step was calculated and secure. Finally, they saw signs of real safety in the distance. A small settlement, a cabin, or even a rock shelter that could provide protection from the remaining storm. The mother's face lit up with relief, and the child's eyes widened at the sight of potential shelter. The cowboy guided them carefully, maintaining focus until they reached the first true signs of safety. The horse's steps were more confident now, sensing the end of the dangerous journey. The mother whispered softly, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "We made it," she said, her voice filled with relief. The child clung to her, exhausted but safe, and the cowboy allowed himself a small sense of accomplishment. They had survived the storm's fury, navigated dangerous terrain, and maintained their courage and determination throughout. The bond between them had grown, unspoken but strong, a connection forged in the midst of danger and fear. As they approached the shelter, the storm finally began to ease. The rain turned into a light drizzle, and the wind lost most of its power. The plains, though still wet and challenging, seemed calm in comparison to the chaos they had faced. The cowboy guided the horse carefully, ensuring the mother and child reached the shelter safely. Every step was a victory, and every moment brought relief and a renewed sense of hope. Inside the small shelter, the mother and child were able to rest for the first time in hours. They were wet, tired, and exhausted, but they were alive and safe. The cowboy helped them settle, offering words of reassurance and ensuring they were comfortable. The child slowly relaxed, pressing against his mother and finally closing his eyes for a brief moment of sleep. The mother's arms ached, but she felt a deep gratitude for the cowboy, whose courage and determination had brought them through the storm. Outside, the storm continued to fade, leaving the plains glistening under the soft light of the sun breaking through the clouds. The air smelled fresh and clean, a stark contrast to the chaos of hours before. The cowboy stepped outside briefly, looking over the land he had guided them through. The journey had been dangerous, exhausting, and frightening, but it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit, the power of trust, and the bonds formed in the most difficult circumstances. The shelter was small but solid, made of rough wood and stone that offered protection from the storm. Inside, the mother and child huddled together, still shivering from hours of cold rain and wind. The child's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, and his breathing was slow but steady as he clung to his mother. The mother's arms ached from holding him so tightly, but she felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude. They were alive, safe, and finally out of the storm's immediate danger. The cowboy moved carefully around them, ensuring that they were comfortable and dry as best as he could. He unfastened the horse's reins and gave the animal a moment to rest, patting its neck gently. Even the horse seemed relieved, its ears flicking back as it shook off the remaining raindrops. The cowboy glanced around the small shelter, taking in the walls, the roof, and the narrow openings that allowed light to filter in. It was not luxurious, but it was enough. Enough to keep them safe and warm until the storm passed completely. The mother looked up at the cowboy, her eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking but sincere. We don't know what we would have done without you." The cowboy gave a small nod, his face calm, showing no sign of pride or boastfulness. "Just hold on," he said gently. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." His voice was steady, a comforting presence in the quiet of the shelter. The child stirred, his small hands clutching at his mother's shirt, and looked up at the cowboy with wide eyes. He had been frightened beyond measure, but now he sensed safety. The cowboy knelt slightly, reaching out his hand in a careful gesture of reassurance. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. You don't need to be scared anymore." The child's small fingers grasped the cowboy's hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of trust that spoke louder than words. Outside, the storm finally began to fade. The clouds that had once covered the sky were breaking apart, allowing small beams of sunlight to filter through. The plains glistened with rainwater, reflecting the soft light and giving the landscape a serene, almost magical quality. The wind had calmed to a gentle breeze, carrying with it the fresh scent of wet grass and earth. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of hours before, and yet the memory of the storm remained vivid in the minds of all three. The mother adjusted her hold on the child, who had finally begun to relax, and looked at the cowboy once more. There was a deep, unspoken bond forming between them, forged in the heat of danger and the struggle for survival. She realized that the cowboy had risked his own safety without hesitation, guiding them through mud, water, and fallen trees, shielding them from wind and debris, and offering comfort when it was most needed. Her gratitude went beyond words. It was a feeling that filled her heart entirely. The cowboy allowed himself a brief moment to rest, sitting against the wall of the shelter and closing his eyes for a second. The hours of guiding them through the storm had taken a toll, but there was no time to linger. He scanned the horizon through the narrow openings of the shelter, checking that no remaining threats lingered. The storm's fury had passed, but the plains were still wild, and he needed to ensure they were completely safe. As he looked around, the mother began to speak softly, telling him small details of their journey. She explained why they had been traveling alone, the challenges they had faced, and the fear that had gripped them as the storm approached. The cowboy listened carefully, nodding occasionally, understanding the depth of their struggle. The child listened too, his small head resting against his mother's chest, comforted by the cowboy's presence. Then something unexpected happened. The mother's eyes widened and she stepped closer to the cowboy. There was a moment of recognition, a flicker of memory that connected them in a way neither had anticipated. "Wait," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know you, I've seen you before." The cowboy raised his eyebrows, intrigued, and shook his head slightly. "I don't think so," he said calmly. "I've only been out here guiding people through the land." But the mother persisted, recalling a memory long buried. Years ago, before her child was born, her family had faced a different kind of danger. There had been a moment when a stranger had helped them, someone brave, kind, and unafraid of the risks involved. Could it be the same man? Her heart raced as she pieced the memory together, realizing that the cowboy who had saved her and her child today was connected to her past in a way she had never expected. The cowboy listened quietly as she spoke, a small smile forming on his face as he realized the truth. Fate had brought them together again, under circumstances that were both terrifying and miraculous. The bond they shared was not just from the storm. They had been connected long before, and now, in the face of danger, that connection had resurfaced in the most dramatic way. The child, too, seemed to sense the importance of the moment, looking up at the cowboy with a quiet curiosity. The mother embraced her child tightly, her eyes glistening with tears of relief and gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered again, this time with a deeper understanding of the man before her. "Not just today, you saved our lives then, and you're saving them again now." The cowboy nodded quietly, understanding that words could never fully express the courage, determination, and humanity that had guided him through the storm. Outside, the first rays of sunlight began to spread across the plains, illuminating the wet grass and sparkling water. The storm had passed completely, leaving a calm and peaceful world behind. The plains were quiet, serene, and beautiful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged only hours before. The cowboy led the mother and child outside, allowing them to feel the warmth of the sun on their faces and the freshness of the air. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. They were alive, safe, and free from immediate danger. The mother and child slowly followed him, walking carefully over the still wet ground. The child's small feet sank slightly in the mud, but the cowboy stayed close, offering a hand to steady him whenever necessary. The mother walked beside them, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief. They had survived the storm, navigated treacherous terrain, and faced fear together. Their journey had tested their courage, endurance, and trust, and they had emerged stronger for it. As they reached the edge of the plains, where the land became drier and the terrain more stable, the mother turned to the cowboy once more. "How can we ever repay you?" she asked softly, her voice filled with sincerity. The cowboy shook his head. "No need for that," he said gently. "Just live, stay safe, and help others when you can. That's all the repayment I need." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience, wisdom, and genuine humanity. The child ran ahead slightly, exploring the safer land with curiosity and a newfound sense of security. The mother watched him, smiling through tears, while the cowboy followed slowly behind, ensuring that they were truly safe. The storm had tested them all, but it had also revealed the strength of courage, the importance of trust, and the unexpected ways that lives can intersect. Finally, as the sun fully emerged, casting warm light across the plains, the mother turned to the cowboy one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady and full of gratitude. "You are a hero, not just for saving us today, but for reminding us that kindness and courage still exist in this world." The cowboy nodded quietly, a small smile on his face, knowing that he had done what he could, guided by instinct, skill, and a deep sense of humanity. They stood there for a moment, three souls bound by a shared experience, looking out over the plains that had challenged them and tested them. The storm was gone, but the memory of it and the bond it had created would remain with them forever. The mother and child would carry the story of survival and bravery with them, and the cowboy would continue his life on the plains, quietly guiding and protecting those in need, ready for the next challenge that fate might bring. In the end, the storm had been more than a natural event. It had been a test of courage, humanity, and the power of connection. The cowboy had shown that true bravery is not just in facing danger, but in caring for others, in acting without hesitation, and in guiding those in need to safety. The mother and child had survived, not just because of luck, but because of trust, hope, and the presence of a man who refused to let them fall. And as the sun shone brightly over the calm plains, the cowboy mounted his horse, looking out over the land he loved and protected. He knew that life would always hold challenges, storms, and moments of danger. But he also knew that courage, kindness, and determination could make all the difference. Today, he had saved lives, but he had also witnessed the strength of the human spirit, the ability to survive, to trust, and to connect in ways that would be remembered long after the storm had passed.